are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, dedicated teacher at the Rochester, New Hampshire Middle School and chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hey, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is June 16th, 2024, and this is episode 282 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we'll hear an interview about one of the best-known lighthouses on the East Coast, Cape May in New Jersey. We will also get a report on some southern New England lighthouses from Judianne Point. We're recording this on June 6th, and I think you're almost done with school for the year, right, Michelle, or are you?
We're getting there. So we have students through next Thursday, and then the teachers still report that Friday, then the following Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
And then we're done.
Well, sort of, but then you told me...
but then I'm doing summer school, so yeah so there's that.
At least you get to be in an air-conditioned school, is that right?
We do not have air conditioning. There are some rooms.
Sorry.
There are some rooms that have air conditioning, like the band room and the library. So we typically will do, that's where they will hold summer school, is in like those rooms that have air conditioning. So.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Because I think we're expected to have
It's pretty miserable in the school right now. I'm on the second floor, and it's just been so hot and humid.
Yeah.
And you can feel the humidity, like the heat, as you hit like the second level when you're going up the stairs. So
yeah, it's early in the season, but it was I think well in the 80s yesterday and humid. So.
Yeah.
Yep. Any other plans for the summer?
Not that I know of right now. So just kind of waiting to get through this, the front of the school year and then see where summer leads me. So.
Maybe catch your breath between the end of summer school and the beginning of the next school year. Yeah. So let's get to today's interview. Please help me out, Michelle.
Sure, Jeremy. Cape May Lighthouse stands at the southern tip of the state of New Jersey on the north side of the entrance to Delaware Bay. The first lighthouse on the site was built in 1823 and the second in 1847. The locations of the first two lighthouses are now underwater.
The present 157-foot brick lighthouse began service in 1859. For many years, a principal keeper, 2 assistants, and their families lived on the station. Automated in 1946, the light remains an official aid to navigation. A first-order Fresnel lens, installed in 1857, is now on display at the Museum of Cape May County.
The property is owned by the state of New Jersey and leased to the Mid-Atlantic Center for the Arts and Humanities, known as MAC. The organization raises funds for preservation and opens the lighthouse to the public. The lighthouse tower was painted white for decades, but in 1994, it was returned to its historic paint scheme with a beige tower and red lantern.
I visited Cape May during my recent 12-day drive down the coast. I was excited to visit there for the first time because it is a really famous lighthouse, and I got to climb it, all 199 steps, so it was an excellent visit. Our guest today, Ben Ridings, is the curator for Cape May MAC. He devoted a Sunday morning to the interview. In fact, it was Mother's Day, as a matter of fact, and he gave me a tour of the lighthouse. I had a great time. So let's listen to my conversation with Ben Ridings now. I'm here in Cape May, New Jersey on a kind of gloomy, rainy Sunday morning. We've just come over from the Cape May Lighthouse. My guest today, Ben Ridings, is the curator for Cape May MAC. Ben, thank you so much for hosting me here today, for being on the podcast on this Sunday morning. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you for having me on the podcast.
And it's also Mother's Day, so that makes it doubly amazing that you're here for this. And I also want to mention Susan Krysiak, who's the Director of Media Relations for Cape May MAC. Susan has made this interview possible and is also hosting me today and facilitated me climbing the lighthouse a little while ago. Thank you so much, Susan.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we're excited for the podcast. Thanks again.
Before we talk about the lighthouse, obviously that's the main subject for today, but I'd like to talk a little bit about what Cape May MAC is and does, and Ben, what your role is. So that's kind of a two-part question. Let me ask you, as the curator for Cape May MAC, what other properties are you involved with besides the lighthouse?
So first off, Cape May MAC is a not-for-profit organization and committed to the preservation, interpretation, and cultural enrichment of Cape May for its visitors and residents. And yes, I am curator, and we run a host of different properties. First off, the 1879 Emlyn Physic Estate, which is a Victorian house museum. Of course, we have the Cape May Lighthouse, and we also have a World War II era fire control tower number 23. Mm-hmm. In addition to these, we also have a myriad of different tours, trolley tours, walking tours around historic Cape May.
So we're actually here at the Emlyn Physic Estate that you just mentioned, and there's a restaurant right below us. I just want to mention that because people might hear some voices or noise from there. It is Mother's Day, and I think people are pouring in for Mother's Day brunch right now, and I can smell it. It smells pretty good. So anyway, we are here at the Emlyn Physic Estate. Can you explain what the significance of this estate is?
Yes, it's actually twofold. The first is this was the year-round residence of Emlyn Physic. He was born in 1855. It's said that he was actually the wealthiest year-round resident of Cape May, but people might have different connotations about wealthy folks in the 19th century, especially the late 19th century, the Gilded Age, as they called it. But Dr. Physic was actually very civic-minded. He donated a lot of land and also other things, money to different organizations. For example, he helped start the golf club in town. He donated land that they ended up building the first convention hall for that very purpose. And the Physic Estate is actually also very important for a reason that has nothing to do with Emlyn Physic. In the 1950s and 60s, Cape May was very run down, and there were two kind of sides here in town. One wanted to tear down everything and build it up like Wildwood, which is right across the way. We've had 1950s hotels, 1960s hotels. The other group were preservationists, so they tore down a huge hotel, in town from the 1800s, and a group of citizens got together and said, whatever the next building is that's slated to be knocked down, we're going to save. And it turned out to be the Emlyn Physic Estate, and that really started the catalyst of this preservation movement in town, and that's why we have, to this day, so many Victorian homes and buildings here in town.
And by the way, people listening might think Physic, that's an unusual name. It's Physick. What kind of name is that?
So I know Dr. Physic's family came from both Ireland and England. I'm not sure which part of the family. It was originally Fishwick, and his grandfather was very big in medicine, actually is known as the father of American surgery, which is kind of funny because Physic, yes, it just happenstance that it turned out to be that was his name, and he became some great doctor.
Okay. I saw that you actually sometimes portray Dr. Physic for the public. Is that correct?
It's a lot of fun. I really like portraying historical figures like Dr. Physic because I think too often, not everybody, but some folks kind of think historical people are characters in a story. And even though, no, I'm not Emlyn Physic, when they just see a human being walk around, it kind of, for lack of a better word, humanizes these people from the past, that they were living, breathing people that really contributed one way or the other, even though they might not have thought of it. They contributed somehow to their town, their city, history in general. Mm-hmm. And from time to time, I have been a lighthouse keeper for special events. And it's something I wish I could do more, just to interpret first person, because I enjoy it, and it seems like the people around me enjoy it as well.
Are you an actor otherwise at all?
No, not at all.
That's great that you do that. Also, you just showed me a children's book that you wrote, Dr. Physic Goes to the Lighthouse. I understand it's a series of books.
Yeah, it's one of a trilogy right now.
Okay.
Yes, we wanted to kind of engage younger folks. It's hilarious when like 3-year-old, 4-year-old kids see me dressed in full Victorian with the top hat. Their jaw just drops. It always makes me laugh every time.
Yeah.
But we wanted to engage more children. So we have 3 books right now that I wrote. Dr. Physic Goes to the Lighthouse is the latest, and it's kind of a way to tell kids a story, but also give them a little information about various topics. And all of the books are, well, 2 of the books are historically accurate. The other one's a poem about Christmas, so I want to say that's historically accurate, but I tried to add history into the, more historical books, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I love it. It's the drawings are really whimsical and cute, and it looks like it's really well done. So congratulations on that. I think it's fantastic. I mean, it is all about this history is all about the people and conveying that to people in different ways, whether it's adults or children. It's so important. You mentioned fire control tower number 23 earlier. What is that?
Yes. So I've worked in all the locations in various roles. So when I was up at Fire Control Tower 23, people would look out and say, there's no trees. Why are people spotting fires? And it doesn't really have anything to do with that. During World War II, there was U-boats off the coast of the Atlantic, and they built these towers to spot for them. So it's called fire control because there would be observers up at the top of the tower, and they would, if they saw a U-boat, they would direct guns along both Delaware and a smaller battery on the shore of Cape May, and they would direct the fire. So that's why it's fire control.
Right.
Nothing to do with forests.
Not forest fires.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I've heard them referred that way before, and I'm not sure it's sunk in that's why it's called that. So thank you for that explanation. We have them up in New England too, where I'm from. They're,
okay.
Fairly common along the coast, and a lot of them are gone. They used to be there. So let's move on and talk about the history of the lighthouse, Cape May Lighthouse. First of all, why was a lighthouse built there in the first place? Why was it needed?
Actually, this goes back for the same reason they needed a fire control tower and guns, because Cape May is at the northern part of the Delaware Bay, and a lot of shipping comes through, especially back in the day. I mean, you have Wilmington, Delaware, Philadelphia, as well as back in the day, Camden, New Jersey was a big shipping area, and even as far north as Trenton, New Jersey, all kind of funnel in through the Delaware Bay and up there. So that's why they decided to make a lighthouse. Now, what's interesting is Cape Henlopen, which is the southern entrance to the Delaware Bay, they got their first lighthouse in 1767. Us on the north side, we didn't get ours until 1823. So it was interesting that there was a large gap between the 2 lighthouses.
Yeah. I was out at Cape Henlopen State Park yesterday. That's really beautiful.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, where the lighthouse once stood. So the present lighthouse, the one that stands today, was built in 1859. And it's one of the classic tall brick lighthouses of the East Coast. Do we know anything about who designed and built the lighthouse?
So we've always been told that George Meade, who would go on to lead the troops in Gettysburg, that George Meade, was the designer of the Cape May Lighthouse. What was odd was I looked into it, and he wasn't doing anything with the Lighthouse Association or the Lighthouse Board. Thank you.
Yeah.
Then, so I dug a little deeper. So in the 1850s, they said the ABC lighthouses, Absecon, Barnegat, and Cape May were all constructed around the same time, but Absecon and Barnegat were done first, and they were done in the same style as Cape May. But then George Meade was the engineer for the 4th Lighthouse District, where all the lighthouses were in. He left a little bit later on, and so our lighthouse was technically supervised by William F. Reynolds.
Yeah.
But
Reynolds,
excuse me. But it looks as though George Meade they based the Cape May Lighthouse design on Meade's design.
Okay.
And it cost about $40,000 to build our lighthouse in 1859.
Wow. What would it cost now to build it, I wonder?
A lot more than $40,000.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you clarified that about Meade. I know a friend of mine, I'll give a shout out to Josh Liller, who's the historian for Jupiter in the lighthouse in Florida. He's done a lot of research on that subject and says Meade deserves a lot of credit, but he's been credited with some lighthouses that he didn't really design.
Yes.
And Reynolds deserves a lot of credit too. So, hi, Josh, if you're listening. For a long time, let's talk about the human history here. For a long time, there was a principal keeper and 2 assistants and their families living at the light station. There must have been quite a crowd for a while there. 2 houses, as I understand. Right?
Yes.
So what was life like in the early days here? Was it really remote in the early days?
So yes, I would say so. I mean, it's all up to the individual.
Right.
But back then, what we referred to as Cape May Point didn't exist. The city of Cape May, which was thriving even back then, 1850s, 60s, 70s even, that's about 5 miles from the lighthouse. So it's a bit of a walk or a ride, if you will. But what happened is in 1876, a group got together and purchased a lot of land around the lighthouse, and they created a community called Seagrove, which was later on named Cape May Point. So I looked up the report by the supervisor for the 4th Lighthouse District, and in 1878, he called what was known as Seagrove as a thriving town during the summer season.
Wow.
I'm sure during the winter season there were a lot less people.
Yeah.
But in the 1880 census, there was 198 people in town.
Okay.
Now, granted, the census were taken in June, so you probably had some people that already set up the summer season. But at least there was a town to go to, whereas before then, there was pretty much nothing. And as you said, there were 2 lighthouse dwellings. The head keeper had his own. The 2 assistants kind of had to share it. They were originally the same sized, and the assistant keepers had big families. So almost immediately, they petitioned to try to get an extension to the second dwelling. They dropped it, and I believe around 1900, they finally got an extension built on the assistant keepers.
Okay. Yeah. I imagine, do you know how many kids there here? With the 3 families, there must have been at times maybe more than a dozen kids.
I'm not exactly sure the amount, but I do know that several assistant keepers and even keepers themselves had families. So yes, I'm sure there were a lot of children running around in the lighthouse complex.
And I wonder if there's like a 1-room schoolhouse in the town or something like that.
You know, that's a good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I know a lot of light stations, the really remote ones, they would have been homeschooled, or they might have had a teacher who would stop by now and then. But since there was a town not far away,
yes,
they probably had a small school. So before we move on to other subjects, any other stories, anything about the keepers and families here that kind of stands out for you?
There are some interesting stories, some of which, perhaps only I'm interested in. We actually have somebody in our organization who's a descendant of one of the lighthouse keepers, and we also have in our archive some photographs. This is very random, but in 1902 we have a picture of the lighthouse and the grounds, and there's just a dog in the foreground, one of the lightkeeper's dogs named Prince, and I just mentioned it to this person, and she said, "Yeah, we have a photograph of Prince too." It was actually 25 years later, so there were 2 dogs at the lighthouse, same breed, both named Prince, but different dogs. I was just like, what are the odds of that happening? But more specifically to the keepers themselves, as we've stated, I mean, the lighthouses were very important for navigation. And in the 1850 exactly, there was a lighthouse keeper by the name of Downs Foster at Cape May, and his review did not go well. In fact, when he took the job of head lightkeeper, he had no training or experience. No instructions at all at how to do his duty. He said he lit the light half an hour before dusk because he said that was the right thing to do. And it just blows my mind that these were very important beacons for folks. And by the 1870s, 80s, there were specific instructions to lightkeepers that spelled out exactly what they were supposed to do. Yeah. And it just boggled my mind that he had such a important charge, and he went in, untrained. I believe his sons were the assistant keepers, so they couldn't really help much, I'm sure, because they only knew as much as he did. What's also interesting is that in 1933, the head keeper was a gentleman by the name of Harry Palmer. He had actually worked at Cape Henlopen Lighthouse before going over to Cape May. And you mentioned you asked if it was kind of a desolate place. His wife hated the move because Cape Henlopen Lighthouse was kind of right near town, whereas it's a little bit of a walk to Cape May from our lighthouse. So she did not like it. But anyway, Harry Palmer had some sort of health problem. We believe it was probably a stroke. He was unable to fulfill his duties, so his wife, Florence Arabelle, known as Belle, she basically took on the duties as head keeper. Her official title was custodian of the Cape May Light, but she did his duties for several years. In fact, when she wanted to retire, the superintendent more or less begged her to stay on at the site and continue to be custodian of the site, but she ended up just wanting to retire.
Yeah. I saw you have an interpretive sign about that, and since we're on that subject, there's a lot of good signage, a lot of good historical signage there, and I understand there's a lot of those are fairly new, and you've certainly had a big hand in those.
Yes. So the Cape May Lighthouse's birthday, oddly enough, is Halloween, first lit on October 31st, 1859, which makes it tough for us to celebrate because, everyone's thinking about Halloween, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so we had a big unveiling of several new panels at the lighthouse, one of which, all of which I'm very happy about, but one was listed all the keepers and assistant keepers that we've known of over the years. And there was also one that we unveiled, which was known as the Beacon of Freedom.
Yeah.
There was a group of stories that a gentleman by the name of William Still put together, and it's all about the Underground Railroad. And I mean, he was contemporary at the time. He worked with the Underground Railroad. So these stories were published much later on, different instances of people telling him. So there was one particular instance where a group of folks trying to get their freedom entered a small boat off the coast of Maryland, and they actually used the Cape May Lighthouse as a beacon, as a way. We know that that's in New Jersey. We know New Jersey is a free state, so they aimed right for it. Unfortunately, some what were known as slave catchers caught up to them about halfway through, and there was a little bit of a battle that happened with paddles and just fighting. I'm happy to report that those folks seeking freedom made it to New Jersey. I guess the slave catchers, as they were known as, had to turn around and lost that battle, thankfully.
Yeah.
But there are a few instances of that. But that in particular is the panel which we write about and have on the grounds of the lighthouse.
Yeah, I was really glad to see that. And Beacon of Freedom, what a great title for that. Makes a lot of sense. Also, you mentioned to me when we were over at the lighthouse a little while ago something about Benjamin Harrison, the president.
Yes. So Cape May Point, or Seagrove as it was known, started to become a thriving town, but there were some bigwigs that thought, how could we get more attention? And at the time, John Wanamaker, who was a big business person, had a house down in Cape May Point. He was Benjamin Harrison's postmaster general, which was a cabinet position back then. And so he invited Mrs. Harrison and the family to join him one summer. She had a great time. So a group of citizens got together and said, okay, we'll offer Benjamin Harrison a house in town. He thought that could be scandalous, so he declined. So they said, okay, so let's offer it to his wife. And his wife happily accepted. So they spent parts of 4 summers in Cape May Point. One time that we know for sure, Benjamin Harrison was visiting, and it was the 4th of July. And there were, even back then, there were fireworks. This was probably 1890, 1891. So Benjamin Harrison and his family climbed the lighthouse and watched the fireworks display over Cape May.
Good vantage point.
We actually offer that tour now. Believe it or not, we sell tickets for that. So who knows? I would like to say it's a presidential experience that you can experience at the lighthouse to watch fireworks on the 4th of July.
Yeah, I think I've seen relatively recent photos of the fireworks behind the lighthouse.
Yes, it's a pretty amazing sight.
Have you been at the top of the lighthouse for that?
No, but I've heard, and I don't think I could pull off interpreting Benjamin Harrison though. So if not, I would totally do that and go up there.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. So when the new lighthouse was built in 1859, it got a very large first order Fresnel lens. That lens was removed when the light was automated in 1946. So where is that lens today?
It is actually, we have a county museum, the Museum of Cape May County. Mm-hmm. They have been around a lot longer than MAC. So in 1946, it was given to them, it was loaned to them by the Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. So it's up about 10 miles up the road, open to the public to see the original lens in the tower.
Mm-hmm. Another story I read about is that the lighthouse was struck by lightning in 1891. What can you tell me about that?
First off, the lighthouse actually has been struck several times, as late as 2016. Mm-hmm. Thankfully for our safety procedures, as soon as we hear any kind of thunder, everyone has to come down and leave. But anyway, back to 1891. That actually was front page news, and not just in Cape May, which would make sense. It actually made the Philadelphia Inquirer all the way up in Philadelphia. And yes, so the afternoon of June 12th, 1891, the top of the tower was struck. According to the article, there was a hole made in the dome from where the lightning came.
Wow.
It traveled down an electric bell wire down to the assistant keeper's cottage. Mm-hmm. Not really sure the layout of that. That has since burnt down in the 1960s. But anyway, it went down the wire and it kind of arced, and it actually burnt the son of one of the assistant keepers. Not sure how badly. The article didn't really go into that, but it also set fire to his feather bed. Apart from that, yes, that was damage, but apart from that, as far as the mechanisms of the lighthouse, the light itself, there was not any damage where the light could not be lit that night. So one way it was fortunate that the child did survive, so that's important too. But yes, that was a particularly strong storm and incident that happened in 1891.
Yeah, I know. In recent history, lighthouses, of course, are still occasionally hit by lightning, and occasionally they'll knock the lights out of commission for a while until the Coast Guard can fix them. So before we move into talking about the present day a bit, just want to give you another chance if you have anything else about the human history here that that we haven't talked about yet that you might want to add.
Yeah, something that's really cool. As a historian, I like to what I call experience history. Mm-hmm. And people can do that actually by going up our lighthouse, because I mentioned the instructions to lightkeepers. Yeah. There's actually a little section in that essentially states, if the people are willing and they're not intoxicated and they don't interfere with your duty, they suggest you let folks come up and climb to the top of the lighthouse. Yeah. Which, based on newspaper articles of the time, the head keepers loved doing in Cape May. People would come down for the summer if they wanted to climb the lighthouse. The head lightkeeper would be more than happy to show them around, which was really cool. So it's something that people have been doing for decades, centuries at this point of climbing the Cape May Lighthouse. The other thing I wanted to point out were two head keepers. Sam Stillwell actually worked at our lighthouse until he was 80 years old. And by all accounts, he would go up the 199 steps every single day to do his duty. After he retired, there was a gentleman by the name of Caleb Wolson, and he worked at our lighthouse for 41 years. Started as assistant keeper, the second assistant keeper, then first assistant, and finally head lightkeeper. So these people spent a lot of time, decades working at our lighthouse.
Yeah. I think there's only a handful of keepers in the country who are at one lighthouse for more than 40 years. It's really pretty rare.
Yeah.
And I'll just mention that my hometown lighthouse, Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse, had a keeper, Joshua Card, who was there 35 years until he was 86 years old.
Wow.
In 1909, he was considered the oldest lighthouse keeper in the country at the time. That's only 44 stairs, which had to be, that's still impressive that he was doing that, but 199 stairs probably several times a day.
Yeah, and I'm 36 years old, so knowing that story, I feel bad when I'm like out of breath and have to stop. It's like this guy was doing it at 80, and I need to take breaks every landing, and I'm breathing a lot of wind in to try to get up there.
Yeah, me too. And I'm a lot closer to 80 than you are. But yeah, it's not the easiest thing in the world. So moving on to the present day, is the lighthouse, first of all, is it open all year?
Yes. What we would say in town is the off-season, January, February. It's only open 3 days a year, 3 days a week, excuse me,
Right.
Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But this time of year, and well through the summer and even the autumn, we're open 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I have kind of a two-part question. Is there a keeper's house? Are there other buildings standing from the light station? And the other part is, when people come to visit here, what else do they get to see? Are there other buildings they can go into?
So yes, in addition to the lighthouse, we do have the oil house, the original oil house, which is now a gift shop. And for those that cannot make it to the top of the tower for whatever reason, in our oil house, we have like a panorama of what they would see if they climbed it, as well as videos of the Cape May Lighthouse. There's also the head keeper's house, which is not run by MAC. The Cape May Lighthouse is on a New Jersey state park, and the supervisor of the state park lives in the head keeper's quarters. I mentioned a little bit, unfortunately, the assistant keeper's quarters burnt down in the 60s, so that's no longer there. And although not original, we just recently rebuilt the privy on the property, and we have a ticket kiosk in the privy there. So it's on the original footprint of the original privy, but it was a way to kind of bring back that building, but not use it as a privy.
I love it. That's really clever. I was out in Michigan a couple of years ago, and I realized I hadn't really thought that much about it before, but there's still a lot of privies standing at light stations on the Great Lakes.
Oh, wow.
Not so much on the East Coast or the West Coast, from what I've seen, but for some reason they're still fairly common on the Great Lakes. I don't know why that is. Anyway, I love the use of this replica you have. So I read somewhere, maybe it was on the Cape May MAC website, that there have been more than 2 million visitors since the lighthouse was open to the public in 1988. And I think that is probably dated now. It's probably been a lot more than that. But do you know about how many people come here every year?
So I foresaw that this question was going to come.
Okay. How'd you know that?
So I actually went into our ticket database to see exactly how many people visited the lighthouse, really over a 10-year span that purchased tickets.
Yeah.
And that includes groups as well as individuals. So in 2023, we had about 75,000 tickets sold for the lighthouse. And that's generally some more, some less, different years, but that's about it, 75,000 tickets sold for the lighthouse, which, even though I know that's one of our most popular, it's probably the most popular place we have here at Cape May MAC, that still took me back a little bit. It's just hearing 75,000.
Yeah.
I was shocked by that. I
was actually chatting with Susan a little bit about this earlier, and she said approximately half the people who come actually climb the lighthouse.
Yes, that sounds about right. As I said, we're 199 steps, and 157 feet, I believe, is the height of the lighthouse. So it's a pretty tall one.
Right. By the way, I don't know if the mics are picking it up or not, but it sounds like a Mother's Day brunch is really picking up downstairs. So are there special events at the lighthouse? I know of at least one that's a fairly common one, but can you tell me about that?
Yes, there are several. We have a full moon lighthouse climb.
That's the one I knew about.
Yes, which is quite fascinating, just being up there. And then conversely, we have an experience called Stairway to the Stars, and that is a full moon. A new moon climb to the lighthouse, so you could really see the stars. If I can add a plug, one of the best meteor showers of the entire year is in August, and we have one in August. So, I've personally have seen many shooting stars in that August time period. So that'd be something to really check out. We also have the Lighthouse and Fireworks climb, which we mentioned a little bit earlier. During the summer, we have family fun craft shows on the grounds of the lighthouse. And it's a 2-day event. Later on in October, we have the Lighthouse Challenge. That's the third weekend in October every year. There are various lighthouses, life-saving stations, and museums in New Jersey. Yeah. And some people have, traveled the 100 miles or so down and visited every lighthouse during that weekend, which I am very impressed with, the people that have that commitment. But that's always great. We get lots of people that come out for that. And every once in a while, I'll dress as the head keeper for that event as well.
People must love it.
Yeah.
So kind of related to the challenge, I have to ask this since I work for the U.S. Lighthouse Society. You probably have the U.S. Lighthouse Society passport stamp here available for visitors, right?
Yes, we do. That is true, yes.
That's very important to a lot of our listeners, to a lot of members of the USLHS. And I imagine you also have weddings here.
Yes, we recently kind of redid the grounds of the lighthouse, and it looks very nice for weddings. We've had weddings at the lighthouse. We've actually had people ask if they could propose at the top of the lighthouse, which if available, we've made special accommodations so those two people can climb by themselves and just kind of do what they need to do at the top of the lighthouse.
Have you facilitated any of those by any chance yourself?
I have not myself, no.
Yeah. The reason I ask is that I have at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse. It's kind of fun, where a guy will contact me and say he wants to propose to his sweetie in the lighthouse, and I'll take them for a tour, and he'll tell the wife I've arranged for this special tour, or not the wife, but the girlfriend, and when we get to the top of the lighthouse, I'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got to go make a phone call," and I'll leave them alone at the top and just listen for happy sounds. It's worked out well so far. Yeah.
Another thing we kind of did at the lighthouse too, which is cool, is we kind of based on old photographs, there was kind of like I wouldn't say a sidewalk, a brick pathway that we've kind of reinstated, and people can actually sponsor a brick and have their names or the names of others. For example, somebody paid to have one of the head keepers, Caleb Wilson's, his name is on the brick path as well, which is kind of cool. So that's another thing we try to engage folks with, but also make it from history as well.
Yeah. And it's a way of making a little more money for the organization.
That also helps, so we can continue to restore and do other events at the lighthouse.
Yeah. I saw the engraved brick, so I'm glad you mentioned that. So it's getting a little louder here as people come in for brunch, so I'm thinking we might want to wind things down at this point. But I have 2 final questions for you, Ben. These are for bonus points, okay?
Okay.
So the first of the 2 final questions is, if you were talking to someone who knows absolutely nothing about May Lighthouse, what's the one thing you would tell them about it?
So being a historian, I would like to do some, really great historic answer that would be really cool. But I'm also a realist. So I know many people that climb our lighthouse are very interested in history, but a lot of them aren't as well. So the one thing I would like to tell them is most lighthouses, ours really has an amazing view. If you go out to the top, which you can go around, it's caged in for those that are a little weary of heights. But in one direction, you can see the Atlantic Ocean for miles. Then you walk around a little bit, you can see the quaint little town of Cape May Point from above. Walk around a little bit further, you can see the entrance to the Delaware Bay, and even on a clear day, you can see all the way across to Delaware. And finally, 5 miles up the way, you can see Victorian Cape May. So it really is an amazing view up there that you can get 360 view of just so much interesting things, and of course history, being a historian. But I have to mention something history related.
Sure. Well, that all makes sense to me. I know it's always, you have to aim to hit that sweet spot, kind of a balance between the history and the fun in a place like this. You don't want to overwhelm people with the history, although there are certainly some, I'm sure, who are really into it. So the final question for bonus points is, what is your favorite thing about your association with Cape May Lighthouse?
I really like how we've presented the Cape May Lighthouse in a way that we're honoring the lightkeepers and their families, which I'm sure is true of most lighthouses, but I think the general public may not understand or grasp the concept that these lighthouse keepers, this was not a 9 to 5 job. Well, maybe opposite, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. But I mean, they lived at the lighthouse. This was what they did. They even needed, for example, special permission to be away from the lighthouse overnight. I mean, this was their life. And not only the life of the lightkeepers, it was the life of their family as well. So in one way, they were limiting themselves to a greater cause of these lighthouses existed to keep people safe out in the ocean and the bays. I mean, that was why they were there. So they kind of sacrificed a bit of their freedom to really make it so people were safe. And that's something I like to convey, because it was a sacrifice for them to have this position as lightkeepers. And that's something that I'm proud at Cape May MAC that we kind of portrayed to people in the area.
I applaud everything you just said. I couldn't agree more, and it looks to me like you're doing a great job of conveying that to the public here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, Ben Ridings, again, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for hosting me here at the Lighthouse and the Physic Estate, and just keep up the good work. It's just wonderful what's been happening here. And I also want to thank Susan again, Susan Krzyzak, for facilitating all this today. So Ben and Susan, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you again for coming down.
To learn more, go to capemaymac.org. That's capemaymac.org. There's information about the special events at the Lighthouse, as well as other events around Cape May.
So Cape May really is a world-class lighthouse, and is managed by, I would say, a world-class organization. Thanks again to Ben Ridings and also to Susan Krzyzak, the Director of Media Relations for Cape May MAC, for making my visit and the interview possible. And thanks also to Susan for sending me a baseball cap, which arrived today. That was really nice. Next, we're going to go to a segment with our correspondent for the Southern New England region, Judianne Point. Judianne is an award-winning volunteer for Pomham Rocks Lighthouse in Rhode Island, and also first vice president of the American Lighthouse Foundation. I spoke with her a few days ago. Let's listen to that now. Hi, Judianne. How's it going?
It's going very well, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. And I understand you have some news related to a couple of Cape Cod lighthouses today.
I absolutely do. Well, the last time I was on your podcast, I spoke about the Highland Light rededication ceremony in North Truro, Massachusetts. Well, my husband Gary and I hit the road and attended the ceremony on May 3rd. There were 3 speakers: Bill Burke, the Cape Cod National Seashore Park historian; Kevin Kissling, the CEO of Eastern National; and Jennifer Flynn, the superintendent of the Cape Cod National Seashore. All 3 speeches were excellent, short and sweet, but packed with important messages about saving and supporting lighthouses. Afterwards, they had a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and we were in the first group of the first tour of the season. We got to climb up to the lantern, and we actually could see some whales spouting in the distance. So that was pretty breathtaking. What a view. What a great view. Yeah.
What an experience. I've seen whales from Race Point at the tip of the Cape, but I've never seen whales from Highland Light. So that's
So that was,
fantastic.
I guess there had been a few there that week, so we were lucky enough to spot some. And one other thing that I learned when I was there is had no idea how much erosion there is along the national seashore in Cape Cod. It averages about 3 to 5 feet per year that it erodes away. So they were saying that now they moved the Highland Light in 1996. They'll probably have to move it back again within the next 100 years. So that was interesting.
Well, I know they can't pinpoint that. I've heard 50 years, 100 years, I would say, is probably the maximum. But as I'm sure you know, there are some years where big chunks of the cliff around there just falls away. There might be other years where not much happens. But that goes for a lot of the lighthouses that have been moved. Like Gayhead and Martha's Vineyard and others, where they're going to have to be moved again if we're going to save them, but hopefully not real soon.
No, I hope not.
But Highland Light's a great spot, very historic lighthouse. The first lighthouse there was the first lighthouse on Cape Cod. So
that's right, absolutely.
Yeah.
On that same day, we were also invited to visit the Nauset Light, which is in the town of Eastham, Mass, and that's a little further south, and it's still part of the National Seashore. I'd received an email from Susan Abbott, the president of the Nauset Light Preservation Society, that they had some really exciting news about their 1875 keeper's house. She wrote to me, the Nauset Light Preservation Society has signed an agreement with the Cape Cod National Seashore, which is part of the National Park Service, to care for the 1875 keeper's house at the Nauset Light Beach Station. So that was great news. They've maintained the lighthouse, I think, since about 1996. So now they can also take care of the keeper's house. And just for those who are unfamiliar with the Nauset Light Station, except for maybe the iconic image of the Nauset Lighthouse on the bag of the Cape Cod potato chips, originally there were 3 lighthouses there, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, but they were known as the Three Sisters. Is that the only place in the United States where they actually had 3 lighthouses?
I believe so. I've been in the lighthouse biz for like 40 years now. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's don't make absolute statements, like this is absolutely a fact. But to the best of my knowledge, it is the only place in the United States where 3, in fact, I think the only place in the world that I'm aware of where 3 lighthouses were built really close together. So it's quite unusual. I know even at the time, and I think it was 1838, I'm remembering that right,
Yes.
for the first, when the first set of 3, the Three Sisters were built. There were brick towers originally, and even then people thought, this is crazy. What are you building 3 lighthouses for?
Right.
It seemed to be a waste of money to a lot of people. But it was because they had the single light at Highland Light to the north and a double light, twin lights at Chatham to the south. So they wanted mariners to be able to easily distinguish the different light stations.
Right. And I think Winslow Lewis had something to do with that. So he probably wanted to show off his lamps and reflectors for a while. So,
That's probably true. And I think it was his nephew, I.W.P. Lewis, who eventually made a big report to Congress, who criticized the idea of having 3 lighthouses there. So there was a lot of kind of behind the scenes, maybe not so behind the scenes, but bickering between the uncle and nephew about stuff like that.
I don't think that nephew was invited to too many family parties.
No, they probably didn't attend the same Thanksgiving dinners or anything.
But in 1892, those 3 brick lighthouses were replaced. They fell into disrepair, of course, and they were replaced by 3 wooden structures. So eventually, the Three Sisters were fading away, sold into private hands, and the last sister was replaced in 1923 by one of the 1877 twin 48-foot cast iron towers that were located further south in Chatham that you referenced earlier. The northernmost tower in Chatham was the one that was moved to Eastham. So Susan gave us a wonderful tour of the lighthouse, the oil house, as well as the keeper's house. And what I loved about walking into that tower, that cast iron tower, was when you go through the door and you look up and you see the red cast iron stairway with the cream-colored bricks surrounding it. I mean, I felt like I was inside of a seashell. It was just so darn pretty. It had just been recently painted in the last few years as well. But back to the keeper's house, because that's what the main reason that she contacted me. As I mentioned, it was built in 1875, replacing a brick structure that was originally there. Now, in 1996, the same year that the Highland Light was moved back, the cast iron tower was moved back due to the erosion, same thing, and it was moved back 336 feet. Took 2 days. The keeper's house was still there, close to the cliff, and it had been in private hands since 1950 when the light station was automated. So there were still people living there. And the last owner, Mary Dobbinspec, signed an agreement with the National Park Service that she would donate the structure to the Park Service because it would be going now on federal land. There was no private land near the lighthouse. She wanted to be moved in the same orientation that it originally was. So there was a stipulation. She would donate it as long as she was allowed to live in the house for 25 years. So the keeper's dwelling was moved back and placed in the same orientation that it was before. So she was happy. They had their agreement. So that was in 1998. By 2023, then it was now going to be part of the National Park Service. And that's where this email from Susan comes in, because now the Nauset Light Preservation Society is in charge of it. So they are so darn excited about that. We got to tour it, and it's a beautiful, beautiful house. Most of the furniture is still there. And Susan was saying they'd like to bring back the gingerbread trim. It has the same Gothic revival blueprint as the houses at Nubble, Nobska, and Stage Harbor. And there are actually 22 with the same architecture along the East Coast. It was during, I guess, what they call the Renaissance period for the United States lighthouse establishment, where they were rebuilding a lot of lighthouses and lightkeepers' houses. But do you want to know what my absolute favorite part of the tour was, Jeremy?
Definitely. What was it?
Well, let me tell you. In the basement, now they didn't know it was there. The owners had left a traveling library box.
Wow.
And those are, as far as I know, incredibly rare.
They are. There's a few around. For people who don't know, yeah, the Lighthouse Service used to provide these, as you said, traveling libraries. It was like a wooden box with 2 doors that opened up in front.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I'm not sure of the size off the top of my head, but maybe 2.5, 3 feet wide, something like that. Kind of a square with, again, those doors opening up in front with a couple of shelves, room for a good number of books
small
inside.
shelf at the top. Yep.
Yeah, and they would move those around to different light stations. I'm not sure how long they spent at each one.
I think, well, actually, I looked up Eric J. Dolan's Brilliant Beacons before I did this, because I'd read it a few years ago. I think it was 6 months they would have it. And the reason, too, was that they wanted to keep the lighthouse keepers at the station so they wouldn't go wandering off to the local library. So they gave them entertainment and they gave them books to read.
Yeah.
So they'd have them for about 6 months and then they'd move on. But this one, it was right there in the basement. I mean, what an incredible find.
That's fantastic. Yeah. This whole thing is just such great news.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
They do have some future plans. The Nauset Light Preservation Society, they want to make the Keeper's House available starting this summer, 2024, for vacation rentals. The future plans also are to make the house available to the public for tours, group events, school activities, fundraisers, and even artist residencies. So they plan on having 6 weeks this summer of rentals, 1 week at a time, no more than 4 people. They're in the process right now of signing a contract with the rental agent. And I mean, if anyone is interested, you can go to their website, nausetlight.org, Nauset light.org. All in all, Jeremy, it was a wonderful day to see such iconic, beautiful lighthouses. And I have to tell you that both groups there are doing a phenomenal job. I know Susan Abbott and her crew are doing a great job at Nauset, and they've got so much to look forward to now that they actually can work with this Lightkeeper's House. So I was excited for them.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled to hear that. I've known people with the Nauset Light Preservation Society going back quite a few years to the 90s. And they've done a terrific job, and that's so exciting. By the way, you mentioned Mary Dobbins-Beck, who lived in the house for a long time and made that arrangement with the National Park Service. She has since passed away, but she wrote a book on Nauset Light. I believe it's called Nauset Light, A Personal History. I think it's pretty hard to find these days, but it was a nice little book if people can find that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Judianne. This is all great stuff. I always look forward to your reports from Southern New England. I'm starting to develop relationships with reporters in other parts of the country as well, because it's nice to keep up to date on these projects.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's always good to hang out with you here, Jeremy, on the podcast.
Well, great talking to you as always. Enjoy our early summer weather, and I'll talk to you later, Judianne.
Thank you so much.
A reminder to go to uslhs.org to learn about tours, preservation grants, and all the things the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers. Memberships and donations help support this podcast.
Speaking of tours, I want to remind everyone that I will be co-leading a Maine tour in early October, the 6th to 12th. It's a week-long, includes about 30 lighthouses and lots of other cool stuff. There's still room. You can read all about it at uslhs.org. Just look under tours. Before we sign off, do you have a quote about summer, Michelle?
I do, Jeremy. The author Sam Keene once wrote, quote, "Deep summer is when laziness finds respectability," end quote.
I'll drink to that, I guess.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, unfortunately, I guess you're not going to be able to do too much, be too lazy this summer since you'll be teaching summer school, but maybe a little laziness near the end of the summer. Yeah. In next week's episode, we will be discussing Seagirt Lighthouse, another great destination in New Jersey. For now, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
I'm gonna let it shine.